"Mr. Stewart, let me ask you again," he said, drawing out the words. "Do you find these proceedings amusing? Or are you simply too old to understand the gravity of your situation?" James Stewart, 83 years old, did not move. He sat at the defendant's table, his back ramrod straight, a posture that seemed at odds with the faded tweed jacket he wore. His hands, gnarled with age and speckled with liver spots, rested calmly on the table before him. He wasn't looking at the judge. His gaze was fixed on the great seal of the state on the wall behind the bench, his pale blue eyes distant as if he were looking through the wall and into another time entirely. His public defender, a young, earnest man named Ben Carter, shifted uncomfortably beside him. "Your Honor, my client understands completely," Carter began, his voice a nervous contrast to the judge's booming arrogance. "Does he?" Albright cut him off with a flick of his wrist. "Because from where I'm sitting, I see a man who has shown nothing but contempt for this court. Contempt for the law. A simple traffic citation, Mr. Stewart. A failure to yield. And you have dragged this out, refusing the plea, forcing this to trial, wasting the taxpayers' money." The truth was, the citation was bogus. James had been on his way home from a VA appointment when a teenager in a sports car had cut him off, nearly sending his 30-year-old pickup truck into a ditch. The responding officer, a friend of the teenager's father, had written the ticket to James. It was a small-town injustice, the kind that happened every day. But for James Stewart, a man who had lived his entire life by a code of quiet integrity, it was a lie he could not abide. He wouldn't plead guilty to something he didn't do. Albright sneered, interpreting James's silence as senility or worse, defiance. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you, sir," the judge commanded. The silence stretched. James's eyes did not move. "That's it. I've had enough of this disrespect." He began his tirade, a practiced performance for the handful of spectators in the pews. He spoke of civic duty, of the deference owed to the institutions that uphold society. He painted James as a malcontent, an entitled old man who believed his age put him above the rules that governed everyone else. "People like you," Albright said, his voice rising, "seem to believe that having been alive for a long time grants you some special privilege, that you can pick and choose which laws to obey." Ben Carter tried to intervene again. "Your Honor, Mr. Stewart is a veteran. He served this country with—" "I don't care if he commanded a fleet," Albright snapped, his face reddening. "In this room he is a defendant, and I am the judge. His service, whatever it was, does not give him a free pass to disrespect this court. Frankly, this behavior is unbecoming of a man who claims to have worn a uniform. It suggests a certain lack of character, a lack of discipline." The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. He was enjoying this now. He was making an example of the silent old man. "I've seen your type before. Men who talk a big game about service and sacrifice. But when it comes down to basic civic obedience, they crumble. They think the world owes them something. It's a kind of cowardice, if you ask me. A refusal to face the simple consequences of your own actions." The word hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Cowardice. A quiet gasp came from the gallery. Ben Carter's jaw clenched so tightly a muscle jumped in his cheek. He looked at James, expecting to see a flash of anger, a flicker of pain, anything. But the old man's expression remained unchanged. His placid demeanor seemed to infuriate the judge even more. It was as if Albright's words were stones being thrown into a vast, deep ocean, creating no ripple, no effect at all. This silent defiance was a challenge Albright could not stomach. He felt his authority being undermined not by an outburst but by an unshakable calm he couldn't penetrate. He decided to press harder, to find a crack in that serene facade. "So tell us, Mr. Stewart," the judge goaded, his voice a silky, venomous whisper. "Where did you serve? Pushing papers behind a desk in Germany? Peeling potatoes at some forgotten supply depot? Let's hear about this great honorable service you believe entitles you to sit here in mute contempt of my courtroom." James Stewart's hand, resting on the table, twitched. His thumb moved almost imperceptibly, rubbing against the side of his wrist, just below the cuff of his shirt. It was a subconscious gesture, a lifetime habit. Ben Carter, sitting beside him, had noticed it before during their brief consultations. He'd caught a glimpse of what was there, a faded, blurred tattoo, the ink grayed and stretched by time, almost illegible. It looked like a stylized bird or a ghost. As the judge's mocking words echoed in the silent room, James's mind momentarily left the sterile, wood-paneled space. The smell of floor polish was replaced by the scent of ozone and damp jungle rot. The gentle hum of the courtroom's air conditioning faded, supplanted by the deafening thwump 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 of Huey rotor wash beating the humid air into submission. He wasn't at a defendant's table. He was strapped into the jump seat of a specialized blacked-out MH6 Little Bird, the night sky over Laos a terrifying star-filled canvas. He could feel the familiar weight of the radio handset in his palm, the cold metal pressed against his ear as he listened to the strained breathing of men on the ground, men who were depending on him, on his voice, on his call sign. The tattoo on his wrist, once a sharp, stark black, itched with a phantom memory of the needle, a reminder of a promise made in the dark, a world away from this place. The memory was gone as quickly as it came, a flash of lightning on a distant horizon. James was back in the courtroom. Judge Albright was smiling. A predator's grin. He had mistaken James's momentary disassociation for confusion. "Nothing to say?" The judge chuckled. "I thought not. The stories are always bigger than the man." That was it. That was the line. For Ben Carter, it was a line made of pure, unadulterated injustice. He had served himself, 4 years in the JAG Corps. Shuffling papers, yes, but he had done it at Bagram. He had seen the quiet men, the ones with the 1,000-yard stares who never ever talked about what they did. He knew that true valor was almost always silent. He looked at James Stewart, at the incredible dignity he possessed while being verbally flayed, and he looked at the smirking, pompous man on the bench. An anger, cold and righteous, settled in his stomach. The judge wasn't just wrong, he was committing a sacrilege. While Albright continued his diatribe, moving on to the specifics of the punishment he was concocting, Ben Carter slipped his phone from his pocket, shielding it from view with a legal pad. His fingers flew across the screen. He had a friend, a master sergeant at Vandenberg Air Force Base, just an hour's drive away. They had served together. It was a long shot, a desperate hope, but he had to do something. He typed the message, his thumb pressing hard on the glass. "Sergeant Miller, urgent situation. Need a massive favor. I'm in Santa Maria Superior Court, courtroom 4B. Judge Albright. He's about to throw the book at an elderly client, a veteran named James Stewart. He's accusing him of cowardice. The man is being railroaded. Something is very, very wrong here." Ben paused, thinking. He needed a hook, something that would make Miller take this seriously. He added the last crucial detail. "He has a tattoo on his wrist, faded, looks like a ghost or a skull with wings. I think it's a specter emblem. Can you please, for the love of God, run the name James Stewart with that?" Something isn't right. He hit send, his heart pounding. The message was delivered. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, his hand slightly trembling. He had just thrown a stone into the water. Now all he could do was wait and pray it made a wave. In the vast bureaucratic machinery of the United States military, he knew his message was a whisper in a hurricane. But sometimes a whisper is all it takes to start an avalanche. He looked up. Judge Albright was leaning forward again, preparing to deliver his final crushing blow. The trap was about to spring, and Ben could only hope that help was somehow on its way. At Vandenberg Air Force Base, Master Sergeant David Miller was finishing a stack of logistics reports when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, saw Ben Carter's name, and sighed, probably another question about his VA benefits. He opened the text and began to read, his casual posture straightened with every word. By the time he got to cowardice, his coffee was forgotten. When he read the name James Stewart and the word Spectre, the blood drained from his face. Miller didn't stand up. He shot up, his chair clattering against the wall behind him. He sprinted from his office, ignoring the confused looks of the airmen in the hallway. He didn't stop until he reached the locked door of his commanding officer, Colonel Matheson. He didn't knock. He burst in. "Sir, we have a ghost protocol situation," he blurted out, breathing heavily. Colonel Matheson, a man whose placid demeanor was legendary, looked up from his desk, his eyes instantly sharp and alert. "Explain, Sergeant." "A text from a trusted contact. A civilian courtroom in Santa Maria. A man named James Stewart is on trial. The judge is not being respectful. Sir, the contact says he has a specter tattoo." The color drained from Matheson's face as well. He was on his feet in a second, moving to a secure terminal in the corner of his office. His fingers, which bore a thick gold ring from the Air Force Academy, flew across the keyboard with a speed that belied his rank. He entered the name James Stewart and the call sign Spectre. The screen flickered. Then a single stark file appeared, its heading glowing in crimson letters. Classified, Sissy/TK, eyes only. Ghost protocol active. Matheson stared at the screen. "My God," he whispered. He grabbed the secure phone on his desk, the one that connected directly to the Pentagon. He punched in a number from memory. "Get me General Creighton. Now, this is a Spectre 1 alert. I repeat, this is a Spectre 1 alert." The person on the other end of the line understood the gravity immediately. The name Spectre 1 hadn't been spoken on an open line in decades. It was a legend, a ghost story told by grizzled NCOs to scare new recruits. It was a name that commanded a unique and immediate response. Within seconds, the unmistakable gravelly voice of a 4-star general was on the line. "Matheson, this had better be real," General Creighton barked. "It is, sir," the colonel said, his voice tight. "He's alive, and he's in a civilian courtroom in Santa Maria. He's being held as a defendant." There was a moment of pure, stunned silence on the line. Then, "What's the situation?" "The judge is apparently dressing him down, publicly. The charge is a minor traffic violation." The general let out a string of curses that would have made a drill sergeant blush. "A traffic violation? They have Spectre 1 in a traffic court? Son, do you understand who that is?" "Yes, General, I do. Get a detail in the air. Now, I want 2 dress uniforms and a command escort there yesterday. I'm leaving now myself. I will handle the judge. You get our man out of there. And Matheson," the general's voice dropped to a deadly quiet, "do it respectfully." Back in the courtroom, Judge Albright was relishing his climax. He had silenced the veteran, proven his dominance. Now came the sentence, the final assertion of his power. "James Stewart," he announced, his voice ringing with false solemnity. "Given your advanced age, I do not believe a fine or jail time would be a suitable corrective measure. However, your blatant contempt for these proceedings and your clear cognitive dissonance suggest to me that you may be a danger to yourself and others. Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that you be remanded into custody for a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation at the county hospital." Ben Carter shot to his feet. "Your Honor, you can't. That's a gross overreach of—" "Sit down, Mr. Carter, or you'll be joining him for contempt," Albright roared. "Bailiff, take the defendant into custody." A portly bailiff who looked as though he'd rather be anywhere else moved reluctantly toward the defendant's table. He placed a hand gently on James's shoulder. "Come on, old-timer," he said, not unkindly. "Let's go." And for the first time, James Stewart reacted. He didn't flinch or pull away. He simply turned his head and looked at the bailiff. His pale blue eyes were clear, and for a fleeting second, the bailiff felt as if he were looking into the face of something ancient and powerful. He felt his hand recoil as if from a static shock. It was in that precise moment that the great double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. They didn't crash or bang. They opened with a quiet, powerful authority, as if pushed by an invisible, inexorable force. 2 Air Force Security Forces airmen, tall and imposing in their immaculate dress blue uniforms, stepped inside. They moved with a fluid, disciplined grace, one taking up a position at the door, the other beginning a slow, deliberate walk down the center aisle. They were followed by a man who made the entire courtroom hold its collective breath. He was in his late 50s, his hair a distinguished salt and pepper, his own dress uniform a constellation of ribbons and medals. On his shoulders were the 4 silver stars of a full general. His face was a mask of cold fury. He ignored Judge Albright completely, his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanning the room until they found their target, the old man in the tweed jacket. The general strode down the aisle, the rhythmic click of his polished dress shoes on the marble floor, the only sound in the tomb-silent room. The bailiff froze, his hand hovering near James. The spectators craned their necks, their mouths agape. Judge Albright, for the first time, looked utterly bewildered, his face a mask of confusion and indignation. The general did not stop until he was standing directly in front of James Stewart. He came to a halt, his posture perfect. Then, in an act that sent a shockwave through the room, he snapped to attention and rendered a salute so crisp, so precise, it seemed to vibrate in the air. "Colonel Stewart," the general's voice boomed, filled with a deference and respect that bordered on reverence. "General Creighton, United States Air Force. It is an honor to see you again, sir." James Stewart slowly, deliberately, rose to his feet. He met the general's gaze and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "General," was all he said, his voice quiet but clear. Judge Albright finally found his voice, sputtering with outrage. "What is the meaning of this? This is a court of law. I am a judge. You have no authority here, General, or whatever you are." General Creighton turned his head slowly, his eyes fixing on Albright with a look of such concentrated ice that the judge physically recoiled. "You," the general said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone, "will be silent, or I will have my men silence you." He turned back to face the bench, his body angled to address the entire room. "For the benefit of this court," he began, his voice ringing with authority, "and for you, Judge Albright, let me be clear about who you have been speaking to. You are in the presence of Colonel James Jimmy Stewart, United States Air Force, retired. The man you just publicly called a coward is the recipient of the Air Force Cross, the Silver Star with 3 oak leaf clusters, the Distinguished Flying Cross, a Purple Heart, and for an action that remains classified to this day, he was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Lyndon B. Johnson. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Ben Carter felt tears spring to his eyes. He stared at his quiet, unassuming client, who now seemed to be radiating an aura of quiet, immense strength. The general wasn't finished. This man is a living legend. He was a founding member of the Air Force's Special Operations Program in the 1960s. He flew more than 200 combat missions in a secret experimental aircraft over North Vietnam and Laos. He was a pioneer of what we now call combat search and rescue. On one mission, his aircraft was shot down deep in enemy territory. For 3 days, wounded and alone, he evaded capture while coordinating airstrikes that saved an entire company of Army Rangers who had been cut off and surrounded. He did this with a broken arm and a piece of shrapnel in his leg. He refused extraction until the last of those 84 men was safely in the air. The general paused, letting the weight of his words settle. We called him Spectre 1, because he was a ghost. He went where no one else could go and brought our boys home. He has done more for this country in a single afternoon than you could do in 100 lifetimes of banging that little wooden hammer. He turned his piercing gaze back to Judge Albright, whose face had gone from red to a pasty, sickly white. Your conduct today is a disgrace to your robe, to this court, and to the nation this man has defended his entire life. It has been noted, and it will be reported to the highest levels. A man's service record is not a prop for you to mock in your little kingdom, especially when you have absolutely no comprehension of what that service entailed. The rebuke was like a physical blow. Judge Albright sank back into his chair, utterly defeated, his arrogance stripped away to reveal the small, petty man beneath. Then, for the first time since the proceedings began, James Stewart spoke to the court. His voice wasn't loud or angry. It was soft, measured, and carried the weight of decades. Your Honor, he said, looking directly at Albright, respect isn't something that comes with a robe or a title. It's earned. It's earned by your actions, day in and day out. Courage isn't about shouting or making speeches. Most of the time, it's about being quiet. It's about doing the right thing when no one is looking, and when it's the hardest thing to do. He glanced around the courtroom, his eyes meeting those of the stunned onlookers. We all fight our own battles. We all have our own wars. Just be careful you know whose ground you're standing on before you open fire. As he spoke of those quiet battles, another flash echo seared through his mind. He wasn't in the courtroom. He was in a smoke-filled makeshift command tent somewhere in the Esho Valley. The air was thick with the smell of blood and cordite. A young pararescueman, a kid from Ohio named Miller, was lying on a cot, his chest swaddled in bloody bandages. The kid gripped James's arm with what little strength he had left, his eyes pleading. "Don't let them forget us, Spectre," he rasped, a bloody froth on his lips. "Don't let them forget what we did here." James had squeezed his hand. "Never, son. I promise." That promise, that call sign, wasn't a mark of pride. It was a burden. It was the weight of all the boys like Miller that he carried with him, every single day. It was the reason he could not, would not lie about a simple traffic ticket. It was a matter of honor. General Creighton stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Colonel Stewart's back. "Let's go home, Jimmy," he said softly. He guided the old man down the aisle, the 2 airmen falling into step behind them as an honor guard. As they passed, people in the gallery, one by one, began to stand up. Some were crying, some placed their hands over their hearts. It was a spontaneous, silent tribute. Ben Carter stood alone at the defendant's table, watching them go, a profound sense of awe washing over him. The case was dismissed with prejudice before the general's vehicle had even cleared the courthouse parking lot. The fallout for Judge Albright was swift and severe. He was suspended pending a full review by the state's Judicial Commission. The story, leaked by a court stenographer, went viral. Albright was forced to issue a public apology and was mandated to attend a year-long program focused on veterans affairs and sensitivity training. His career was, for all intents and purposes, over. James Stewart, true to his nature, refused all requests for interviews. He wanted no fame, no recognition. He simply went back to his quiet life, tending his small garden and meeting his friends for coffee on Tuesdays. A few months later, a man approached him as he sat at a small table in a local diner. The man was dressed in a simple polo shirt and slacks, his face pale and tired. It was Albright. He stood there for a long moment, shifting his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Stewart," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. There's nothing I can say, but I wanted to tell you, I'm sorry." James Stewart looked up from his coffee cup. He studied the former judge's face for a moment, seeing not the arrogant tyrant from the courtroom, but a humbled, broken man. He gave a single slow nod of acceptance. It was enough. Albright turned and walked away without another word. The lesson had been learned, not through anger or revenge, but through a quiet encounter with true, unassuming valor. James Stewart's story reminds us that the greatest heroes often walk among us in silence, their medals and their memories tucked away from view. If you were moved by his courage and dignity, please like this video, subscribe to Veteran Valor, and share this story so that others remember to never ever judge a book by its cover.